Gundam Card Games GD02 Dual Impact has no impact? All right, so I've got like some very deep-rooted opinions about most things 99% of the time, but especially in regards to card games. And especially when we're talking about things like GD02. We're going to be jumping into some React content, and we're not going to do this super often, but it's the type of thing that you guys like seeing every now and then. Let me know down below. But here we're going to be jumping into talking cards with Garrett. So specifically, the truth about GD02's dual impact. In this video, Garrett talks into detail about how, for the most part, dual impact is what I like to call a no impact set. The power level is just kind of off to contest the high power level of the cards that we got in set 1. We won't be talking about that video specifically though, because the video is already reacted to by Side 9. So they're like a dual content creator team that did a response to Garrett's video. So what I'm going to do is a response to the response video. Now, for what it's worth, before we jump right into it, I lean very heavily with a lot of the talking points that Garrett makes. I kind of agree with them. Side 9 do make some good counterpoints about the usability of cards, or kind of how cards are evaluated, or the viability of like dies to removal. With all that in mind, I do think there's some places where if you just look a level beyond just the baseline of like, well, yes, this card is playable, this card is playable, you'll see that the format itself though hasn't changed a whole lot. Kudos to these content creators. Links to all their stuff is going to be down below. So let's jump into it.
So SCO6 Clan introduced a whole new archetype that's really cool and also has support within the set. However, it's not a complete deck. We just missed the mark.
100%. So the biggest way that I describe GD02 or the clan deck is that it is a deck that is incredibly consistent, right? You have like the one cost command card that allows you to be able to search for a pilot or a thing. A lot of your link abilities search for additional cards or kind of manipulate the top of your deck. And then if you want to go even deeper into that, you have like the new type stuff that allows you to scry like the top 3 cards of your deck. And if you have a new type, be able to draw, right? So the deck is built on a baseline foundation of consistency, which, to be fair, for an incomplete archetype is not a terrible place to be, because it only takes 2 or 3 power cards to be able to like change up what it does. It is legitimately the purest mid-range deck, but we'll talk about a little bit. The biggest issue with that is the fact that the mid-range deck does not have a place to exist within this meta. So not only does that happen, but then the deck itself is like missing a couple tools. It doesn't have great early game, and then it doesn't have the great end game to be able to compensate for not having that early game. So it does things, but it's not at a level in which the deck can really explode and perform against what's really doing well in the meta right now.
It's so close to being a deck.
It is close. It is so close.
The fact that we don't have any 2/2s or anything like that that are clans, or any low-level units that really are impactful, it really holds back the clan stuff from being a really good deck, and a really consistent deck at that. Like, there's pieces. Like, this archetype could be really good in the future. It's just not really good right now. And between the SDO6 starter deck and GD02 dual impact, there's just not enough to make it work. I'm hoping in the future we get more support that makes it work.
We're starting by talking about Clan, a fun topic. Clan is pretty notable as far as archetypes in Gundam are concerned, as it's the clearest form of something that is relatively locked to its archetype.
Yeah, because so much of the deck is asking for like, hey, if you have another clan unit, hey, is there another clan unit on the field? Hey, do you have a link clan unit? Hey, look at the top of your deck for a clan unit, or hey, play a clan unit. Like, the deck just relies so much on like high rolling into your clan on clan on clan that you really get punished for deviating too far away from it. It's not to say you can't tech, but like, can't tech too much.
Between Red Gundam, Machu, Booster G-Pucks, and wanting your Shuji links, even the smallest package wants the majority of your deck to be clan.
Especially since you want your deck to be consistent.
Garrett's main claim here is that the deck lacks early game options, a point that we largely agree with. However, just because a lot of the archetype wants clan doesn't mean that it completely stops us from playing out of archetype support pieces. Our build from our most recent video is playing 2 copies of a generic 2-1-2-2 and 4 copies of Wing Gundam Bird Mode to help us get to Booster G-Quux faster, all without a significant lowering of consistency for clan-related AP.
Yeah, so there's definitely room for tech in this format. I'm a little bit dubious about Bird Mode, because like, if you're up against aggro and the best thing you're doing on level 3 is playing Bird Mode, you're probably dead. And then against other ramp decks in which this is the most effective against, they are just going to be able to outpace your top end because their top end is better. Though people can build deck however they want, so it's whatever.
P-pumps, or finding targets offset G-Quux or Machu. But every deck has to have some weakness, so Clan may struggle turns 1 through 3, but the mid-game payoff is worth it.
Yeah, it's not too bad. I think First Strike is decent. It is probably one of the easier ways to be able to get First Strike, although we're seeing it more and more on cards. This is very comparable to like Death Scythe, right? You need the link, which is like effectively how Death Scythe works. You need a very specific pilot for it, but the stats are slightly worse, and you need another clan unit on board, which means you have an empty board. It's not great. So it's like the biggest thing about GD02 is like opportunity cost. And we're going to see that more and more as they talk about more cards that have come into GD02. So it's like, yeah, the cards can do things and you can play the decks. And I want to say that no deck is at a place where it's unplayable. At the end of the day, you're playing at your kitchen table, you're playing at a low power locals, like play whatever you like, right? But when we are talking about like things that have impacted the higher end of the meta and what you're expected to see tournaments, which like, it's a lot of the same shit. Being a worse version of something else you could be doing doesn't put you in an amazing spot. But I think the G-Quux cards are really cool. I think First Strike is great. I'd love to see more things with First Strike. And then naturally, the being able to play 2 bodies is cool there.
It's just these things don't have the support needed. And then let's look at something like the Oz stuff with Epyon, right? This was introduced in GD01, and now we got Epyon. And it's like Epyon still isn't good enough to impact all the Oz stuff that was already there, because the Oz...
To be fair, Oz isn't a real archetype. Like, it's just not. It happens to be, like, it has a trait that they all say Oz. And naturally, Epyon in Oz makes, like, sort of sense, because naturally you're already running Zex and that type of deck. But the better way to think about Epyon is that it's just a top-end boss monster that you have some additional bodies you can choose to link with, like the rare Tall Geese from set 2 or the LR Tall Geese from the starter deck. Arguably Zex Leo if you want to go down that route. But that's like the better way. And that's the way it's been seeing success, right? Like we've been seeing blue-white decks from set 1 to set 2 variations. You can go with like the Titan stuff. You can be playing Epyon instead. That's a better way to think about it. But I do agree. Nothing that Tall Geese really does changes inherently what the decks that want to be playing a card like Tall Geese change what it's going to do, right? Like you're still like base white deck, blue boss monster, and that could be a Titans, it could be a Tall Geese, or it could be an Epyon. Epyon has the benefit that it can like swing twice, but then it's like very similar to the unicorn package, and that like if you have your 3-card combo, you're able to swing twice there instead. But Epyon's like a bit more flexible, but it's also more costly. So there's a lot of balancing acts there. I think it's a neat card. I don't think it's an archetype per se. And I think the biggest point of contention against it is that like it doesn't do anything to change what we were doing in set 1. And it just plays into the similar play patterns that a blue boss monster would do in set 1, but now in set 2. And that's like a theme that we see with like almost everything with set 2, including at some point we're going to be talking about blue purple. Very similar points I'm going to have about that.
Stuff in the beginning wasn't that good. Zex is still good. I do like the new Tall Geese. I think that's a real unit. But it's like their pieces aren't aligned yet. I do think in the future sets, some of this stuff could really, really pop off. But I think when we're looking at the meta and we're looking at the way Gundam is being played competitively, we were hoping GD02 would be a much more impactful set.
Agreed, 100%.
Garrett also starts the discussion on Oz support by leading with Epyon, which is a white Fang card. End of argument. Okay, to be fair, threat to Oz is apparent with Epyon requiring linking with Zex, which is an Oz pilot. However, Epyon itself isn't beholden to Oz as an archetype, much like Wing Zero isn't mired in Operation Meteor, even though it's a G-Team card.
You should get into stand-up foam. But, in all seriousness, Epyon itself is an example of a card with impact in the set. It has performed well in our testing, is putting up significant results in Japan, and has had enough fan support for Gravity Eye to write a 4,400 word primer on a version of Blue-White Control. It is
nice. To be fair, I think like almost 95% of what's useful in a blue-white primer or deck or whatever that uses Epyon would probably also be applicable to like any blue boss monster, right? Like whether you're still using the unicorn stuff, whether you're using Titans. I think relatively for the most part, the most impactful parts of those decks are the white cards and not so much the blue cards. I think the blue cards, you could like pivot between any of them and they'd all be like very, very similar play experiences.
It is linked in our description to give it a look if you are interested.
And to be fair, I don't think things like need to be tied to archetypes super tightly. Inevitably, as the game gets older, Bandai tends to really push archetypes and we'll get them in that form eventually. But my biggest point is just that like the variation in gameplay, right? Like if there are meaningful ways to be able to play the game differently, that you're not gate-kept into playing a specific way because of what the top of the meta is doing, then that's like where we are in a good place. And I think that's where this meta kind of fails.
Here's an idea. What if archetypes are designed not as standalone decks, but as packages to be played in synergy with other
I think that's fine. Like, I think that's a perfectly good way to go about it.
This is the reason why the two-color deck building restriction is in place, and the design of the set sure seems to reinforce this idea.
Even in Green-White Wing Zero, a consistent baseline used in Garrett's video, we see the melding of green Operation Meteor with white Earth Alliance. The early blocker package helps supplement and buy time to reach the high end of starter Wing Gundam and Wing Gundam Zero.
Incredible analysis, my boy Midnight Riala. I could truly never have done it without you and your intelligence, smooth social skills, and amazing look. You're the greatest. Did you really put that in the script for me?
Yeah, so Splashable packages is naturally like a big component of the game because of the Splashable deck building. But arguably that's why almost every deck is white. So like, or like some variation on like cards go burr. So yeah, I think that's fine. I don't think we need to be tied to hard archetypes right now, especially since Bandai is probably going to do that job for us in like 2 to 3 sets time, if we're being totally honest with each other. So like that's fine. Inevitably strong cards will be able to be used in multiple places. I think that's like one of the weaker points, but of course we keep using the example of like the deck that was one of the best decks of the previous format now in the current format.
The problem is, a lot of archetypes this set are having that same problem. Let's look at Titans. We get Psycho Gundam, we get 4. These are interesting cards that do interesting things. However, it needs more support. Psycho Gundam on itself isn't that crazy of a card. Yeah, it has Breach, yeah, it can draw you a card, yeah, it can heal and stay around.
I mean, those are 3 things, my guy. Like, those are 3 very relevant things, right? Like one of the reasons that like ST Gundam is like so powerful is that Gramps has repair too, right? So I think I think Psycho Gundam does actually do a lot of things. I think it is an impact card. I think you can play it in a blue-white build and it'll be a successful variation of a blue-white build. I think you can play Titans, and Titans are probably pretty close to like the best out-of-the-box archetype for set 2 in terms of what the deck can be doing, because like it wants Titan cards, but it's flexible enough that your entire deck doesn't have to be Titans in the same way that like a clan deck does. So I don't know. I think Psycho Gundam is kind of one of the weirder choices because it's like one of the more impactful cards. But when you take like a step back and look at like what Titans are doing as a whole, yeah, Titans as a whole are still not doing enough to be able to shift the game away from what we're doing with all the blocker shenanigans or the hard aggro.
But it's not that hard right now to do 6 damage. So it kind of forces
not
you to
easy, but it's not hard.
Something more like blue-red in it.
You almost always need a link for it, but
Psycho Gundam can only survive 1 turn. It's not getting the value. It's not having the impact that you would hope it would have throughout a game. I mean, you got to remember, Green-White just got a brand new level 4 cost 3 unit in Gundam Heavy Arms that gets to look at the top card of its deck and then either put it to the bottom or keep it at the top. But it's also a Hero UE link. So that means it can be a 6/6 unit on turn 4. Psycho Gundam's coming out at, turn 6 doing that. And it's just such...
Well, it's not just about the AP, right? It's like the longevity, the fact that you can get multiple heals off if you have multiple Titans. It's the breach. It's the fact that you'll get the card draw. Like, I do get what you're saying in the fact of like 6 AP is like a middling stat line depending on what other decks are doing. And we do need to be aware of what other decks are doing as we push archetypes in newer sets to be able to change up gameplay. But like, I do think here Psycho Gundam provides like a level of flexibility that you're looking for versus just the raw power.
An easy answer to Psycho Gundam and one of the most popular decks that people are playing right now in Green-White.
Also, dice removal is
we
never
see
a
Garrett
strong
talk
argument.
about how Psycho Gundam is not an impressive card, mainly on the back that a hero linked to Gundam Heavy Arms can cleanly deal with it at a lower cost and level. But let's zoom into the Psycho Gundam play pattern really quick. A linked Psycho Gundam, assuming a rested target to swing into in a Hyzak or MA mode, deals with a unit, breaches 3 to the base or takes a shield, repairs 2 at the very least in the process, and if that wasn't already enough, 4 is giving you a card back if you meet hand requirements.
So let's assume the opponent does have a linked hero and heavy arms ready to strike Psycho Gundam down. They play the linked unit and rush into Psycho Gundam, trading the 2 units.
Yeah.
My Psycho Gundam is gone, but I'm still up on the trade since I have refunded one of my cards, breached a shielder base, and have taken out another unit during my own link play, at the measly resource cost delta of 1.
This gets into a greater card analysis issue that we see when evaluating cards, and this doesn't just apply to Garrett. Any card is bad when it's assumed that your opponent has the exact cleanest answer to it.
Yes. But also, depending on the card game and depending on, like, they're getting into the whole, like, dice to removal is always a bad argument, which I do tend to agree with, though sometimes, like, stuff just dice to removal. But especially with, like, a deck like Wing, by the time you get to Psycho Gundam, very often by the time they've drawn, I think the percentages are pretty high, given the deck that you'd be playing against, that they would have an answer for it, right? Sure, that's not always true, but I think it is more often than you would be surprised.
But that isn't how we play or evaluate cards. Sure, your green-white opponent give up one of 4 copies of hero and a heavy arms to deal with the threat the turn after it comes out, or they could just realistically be on several of their 16 blocker package, at which point...
But also, by the time your blue opponent's on 6, you might, depending if you're playing some ramp, you might be on Wing 0 at that point, which at that point is just like a huge neg to the deck, or anything else. So it's just like, specific to this specific situation on how they evaluated the removal, yes, but like in the phase of the game where Psycho Gundam is coming down, which usually means that blue-white needs to be stabilized in some form, although I guess blue-white against green-white to be playing, you're supposed to be the aggro deck. I don't know. It's kind of interesting. But again, yeah, like Psycho Gundam will probably be protected. You're probably playing in a white deck. Like dice removal is always kind of a weak argument, and we kind of need to evaluate cards outside of that for the most part.
Psycho Gundam quickly becomes an absolute house. Cards don't exist in a vacuum.
I think it's a good card.
This doesn't even touch the threat Psycho Gundam poses to other decks that want to play low-to-the-ground units.
Overall, this is a modified dies to removal argument.
Yes,
it hasn't worked for years in other card games, and it doesn't work well in Gundam.
Well, it works sometimes. Dice to removal is a very poignant argument when a card comes in and does nothing. But because of linking in this game, most of the time that like not really the case.
Card game either. It's time we stop using it.
Power creep is important. That's what this whole point of discussion is, because I think this gets to the crutch of the issue with set 2, in that there's not enough power creep in set 2. And to a degree, that's true. And that's 2 ways. There's like vertical power creep and there's horizontal power creep. So, and I think set 2 kind of fails on both axes. One is more dangerous than the other if not taken care of properly, but a set that has no impact leads to a meta that doesn't change and leads to a staleness in gameplay. Battle Spirits set 2, notably, which was a game I played for like an entire year, finished 19th in the world, won like tens of thousands of dollars, yada, yada, yada. Set 2 was like, had almost zero impact on the set. You had like a couple of key cards that allowed you to play in specific ways, but for the most part, the set was a complete flop. They didn't change the way people played, the cards weren't impactful enough, and it led to a really stale place where people are just kind of really down on the game. And if you're up in any communities at the moment, I think generally people are pretty down about set 2. Thankfully, set 3 reveals have started, but like set 2 is kind of just this is just where we're at the moment, which is exasperated by like the fact that the best decks are, you're either trying to aggro down your opponent because all they're playing is blockers, and then all you're playing is blockers because your opponents are just trying to aggro you down.
I think when we look at the 4 categories, bases, pilots, commands, units, that we'll all agree that it's not as impactful as we hoped. Like when we look at set 1, there is not a pilot in this set that is better than Amuro, Rei, or Kira, and these were in,
That's because Amuro is like arguably bannable or erodable. I think Kira is just strong, but Amuro is kind of messed up. There's an argument to be like, okay, just rest the card though. What's so good about that? But it's just like with the way the game plays at the moment and the way the stat lines line up at the points in the game where Amuro comes out and the cards he's got access to link into, I don't know. I think it's one of those things where it's like, oh, hey, make a pilot that's like better than these. Whereas I'm like, this is where I'm like, the vertical power creep of that is a little bit scary. Whereas I think instead we should be looking to the horizontal power creep of like introduce pilots that change the game in a way that interacts really well with what the current gameplay is doing, what the current decks are doing, and hopefully that'll carve out a spot for it in the meta.
Starter decks, I understand, but it was the set 1 meta. But there's nothing better than those in this set.
I mean,
and that's
they're really strong.
To me.
One, you could just make cards better and better all the time.
Bad.
To be fair, they said this on the Kaijudo panel, but like, this is exactly what Magic decided to do with their fire design, right? And like, yes, it led to more ban lists. Yes, it led to more, like more banned cards than we've ever seen and metas that people may not have appreciated. But like, it is something that a lot of big companies have pushed, right? Pokemon is like insane power creep. Now, Bandai is insane power creep, right? Every 2 to 3 sets, you get a big change. And just because people want to change the pace, as much as people complain about bans, as much as people complain about broken metas, which like, hey, I was playing Fusion World before I was playing Gundam, right? And like set 2 was a tier 0 format. I get it. But by not pushing the envelope, you just kind of leave the whole game in limbo.
How do you feel about that, Mon?
That's not good.
Also, what happened to Kaijudo, right? Like, I don't know.
There's this really peculiar moment in the last third of this video where Garrett talks about wanting a pilot in the set that is better than ST01 Amuro Ray or ST04 Kira Yamato. And I just had to pause. What would that even look like?
Of course, that's more of a joke, as we think it's fair to say that Garrett isn't explicitly calling for enhanced versions of Amuro or Kira, but more so pilots that are widely played in more decks, or exist on a power scale that is the same, or some combination of those traits while also having plenty and versatile linkies.
We have several examples of pilots that have found success in decks in the GD-02 format already, including but not limited to Former Asame, repeatable value to cap out aggro.
Mikazuki August, ping damage off a unit that enables dangerous link units.
Havon Card, see above.
Machu, tempo synergy deck that gets deeper while enabling its value.
So I think purple doesn't count. And we're going to get into that because they talk about like blue, purple, like impact on the meta and like purple's impact on the meta. And I think there's a wider conversation to be said about like why that's happening specifically the way it is. 4 has had fine impact on the meta, right? Like I want to say like when you look at the actual topping decks, you might have a build or 2 that's running Titans. So like 4 is fine. I think she's one of the better pilots for sure. I think Haman is also fine. It's like red generic, which it makes it a little simpler to be able to build. It's Neo Zeon, it's new type. So she definitely has her usages. I think it's hard to say I think it's hard to say Machu is like an impactful pilot because like Clan actually has done nothing this meta. So,
These are all very serviceable, best in slot pilots that if they don't match the rate of
serviceable is fine. I think these are all serviceable pilots.
Amuro, Kira in a vacuum are definitely offering enough for their own deck and synergies to be able to compete with them in the same tier.
Subject, before I wrap this up, let's go over the purple stuff, because I do think purple and red got like the biggest boost, right? Like, yeah, I'm saying green, white, blue, white just got better because of Rick Diaz, and I totally think they did. And I think Rick Diaz is the most impactful card in the set.
Correct.
Unfortunately, but I do think purple got better. It got more consistent. The new Barbados that can come out on level 3 only costs 2. When damaged, when it attacks, gets to draw a card. Card is really good. I like that card, but I don't know that it puts purple blue over the top. I do think it can maybe, play along tier 1, tier 2, and saying tier 1's green, white, and green, blue. I do think it's somewhere in there, just like red blue. And red blue got, all range attack, I think is really good. The command that can ping 1 to everything that's not a link unit, also has a burst of a ping.
Also, to start on the point of no new decks for the meta, we've introduced a whole new color, with at least 2 shells that are cracking the meta. Garrett himself admits this. We aren't going to harp too hard on this, but it does feel strange to make our starting point, the set has minimal impact, to only gloss over one of the most apparent points of impact.
And that's where I think it's like, yes, if we analyze the pure cards that people are playing in decks, like, yes, purple had an impact in that arguably one of the top 3 to 4 decks in the format is utilizing purple cards. But then when you take a step back and realize that like the blue purple deck is effectively just the 1-year war deck, but that's like but it's utilizing purple aggressive cards versus green cards, and the play patterns aren't super different. then you start to realize like, oh, what we're playing, the way we're playing the game isn't really changing all that much. Sure, you lose Char, which means you don't have as much Hymo. You don't have any Xeon stuff, which means you don't have to go so hard into Xeon, so you don't get your benefits from like the LR starter deck, Char Zaku 2. And instead in purple, you can be more flexible. But the purple deck runs primarily blue cards because the blue aggro cards are cracked. And it's like, okay, now we just touch up with some Barbados stuff. And like there are cute plays that you can make in the blue-purple deck that you weren't able to make in the green version. Whereas like you can use Mikazuki, be able to ping something that gets you in range to be able to Amuro. Now you Amuro rest it, then you go through. Even though the Char Link would have just gotten through the blocker anyways. But it's different to rest something that, anyways. Just to say that like, while, yes, the plays themselves are different, the cards themselves are different, the play patterns end up being very similar, especially when we're talking about decks that are being aggro, right? They very much lean into just killing your opponent as quick as possible. And the reason that that's the case is because of, like Garrett was saying, you got the Rick Diaz's, right? So like now you just have the better suite of blockers. The blocker deck is splashable and everything. Almost every single shell in the game, you need to first ask yourself, okay, but what if I had 10 to 12 blockers? And then like go from there. And it's very often probably the best way to be able to play the deck. So the meta is forced into a very awkward place. And actually, Uni talks about this in a video. I was going to react to that video, but it's just kind of been a while. If you guys want to see me react to that video, let me know in the comments down below. But in that video, he kind of talks about the dichotomy of aggro and the blockers and the death of mid-range in the game. Or you can't really die if you never existed. So that's where I think this argument falls a little bit apart and where I agree with Garrett. I think Garrett's doing a really good job of explaining like the symptoms of why everything feels the way that it does. And I do think Side 9 do a good part of rebuting those specific facts when he brings up like what he's seeing and the why he's seeing them. But I think if we do end up taking an even higher level step back and look at like, okay, but like what does this really mean for the meta? What does this really mean for the way that people are building and playing decks to have success? Then you just end up seeing a ton of homogeneity from set 1 and seeing like, oh, we're actually just doing the same thing. And even though we're using some different cards to be able to do so with like the blue-purple deck, we're still in a position where we're doing the same stuff.
We understand that perhaps Garrett wanted more out of these individual archetypes, such as blue-purple tempo being absolutely explosive, or maybe another color combination that wasn't previously good rise up the ranks. Seeing more discussion that qualifies this position would have done a lot for us in finding out where our expectations and Garrett's divert. But with nothing else to go on, we agree that blue-purple and blue-red builds seem strong this set.
Yeah, I mean, they're decent. Quebly is a cool card, obviously. It seems the white-red or whatever version of the deck has seen some decent success. I think having access to suppression is huge. Having more ping damage is huge. So, like, yeah, I think Quebly's been decent. But, right, again, it's like it feels more like a variation on the red-white deck that was kind of doing similar things anyways than purely what the deck is doing. At least it gives some Neo Xeon love, and you can kind of variate your builds from there. You can go into, like... you can go into more red Xeon heavy builds and not feel too terrible about it. You can kind of explore like full frontal and stuff like that. So, for what it's worth, I think the level cost system is one of the coolest in Gundam. It has the benefits of a curve system in which power is restricted by curve without the downside that the game is, oh, on turn 1, I play my 1 drop. On turn 2, I play my 2 drop. On turn 3, I play my 3 drop. Because by the time you are on turns 3, 4, 5, 6, because the cost is lower than the actual level you're at, you can be more flexible with your turns. I think it's one of the most impactful systems in the game. I think this actually is inspired from Dragon Ball Masters, where in Dragon Ball Masters, you have cards that like cost 8, but have like a ton of effects that say you can just pay 2 to play it. Or so on and so forth, depending on if you have like 3 or 4 total energy. So this is an inspiration off of that system. I think it plays very well within the game. I think the issue is the fact that the card draw in the game does not keep you having enough resources in hand to make meaningful decisions on what you should be playing. Usually you're deciding between 2 cards, maybe 3, whereas I think the game would be at its peak if we were at a point where we were deciding between 3 to 5 different cards at any point in time, and that's where we'd really see that skill expression.
And I think when we start looking at all this stuff, like even the units, there's not a unit in this set that's as good as Wing Zero. Wing Zero takes nothing. It just, you play it down, you deal 3 damage to everything that's level 5 or less, and it has high
Also the biggest card in the game.
maneuver, and it's a 5/7. Doesn't need a pilot, doesn't need anything. It's all
like, I think Wing Zero's fucked up, right? Like that's the issue, is that it's a messed up card more so than like every card should be Wing Zero. But Wing Zero's here now. So the cards that we build in the future need to account for like, hey, that's just where the power level of the game's at.
Always going to do everything it can. And there's not as many impactful units in this set like that.
In linear resource-based card games like Gundam, it is important to note that cards operate on a sliding scale that weighs their power relative to other cards playable at that point in the game.
Yeah.
A very basic example here is the differences between the Gym, Strike Dagger, and Rezell clones. For the difference in 1 cost but no level, you get an extra AP. For the difference in 1 level and 1 cost, you get a +2 AP +1 HP pump.
With this way of balancing cards and costs in mind, it's no stretch to imagine why the card with the highest level and highest cost in the game will end up being the strongest individual card. But that's a vacuum comparison. Just because Wing Zero...
Yes and no, it is also probably the best thing you could be doing at the end of the game, reflective of like everything else in the game.
is bigger than RX-78 does not make it innately a
This is true
card.
though. RX-78 is, Gramps is probably one of the most impactful plays you could make in the game on curve.
We can mention some cards that absolutely do a lot relative to their overall level and cost though. Rezell et al. Gross stat line.
RX-78.
Yeah,
Gross
with
stat line
Alfred.
that becomes very overspec with its link.
Kshatriya. Also a gross stat line with a ping setup and link that continually pressures the board.
And are one of the few ways in the game that you can actually successfully 2-for-1, which is a big deal.
Freedom Gundam. An incredible blocker, a great link, a high impact effect, and it's really, really fucking cool.
Sure.
You know, and I do think Hamon's good as a pilot because it says just a red pilot and it can ping 1. It's a level 5, so it's a little later, unfortunately. And then Quibbly is really good, but it's a level 7. So it's like Red Blue last set was in this weird range where it was like playing pretty fast. You know, level 7's kind of a long time to really...
Because the deck can't afford to go slower. That's the issue. That's why we've seen Blue-Red drop off, right? Blue-Red was a very interesting deck in set 1 in that it played the aggro game, but its early game could contest against the other aggro deck, and its late game was like just good enough, and the deck was just fast enough in that it could sneak against the heavy defense decks. But the deck definitely has an issue against a lot of blockers. So you always have to be in a position to high tempo and kind of high roll a little bit your more defensive opponents to be able to get a shot at the late game. This is like completely gone away in set 2 because like now the defensive decks have just gotten even better at defending. So now, while you can have a really good setup against the aggro decks, which there's quite a few in the meta, especially if they're playing purple, because now you can like ping their stuff and make it really harder for them to like Mikazuki and stuff like that. You're still in a position where the best deck in the room is Wing. They're playing like 12 to 15 blockers, so their defense is harder. So now every single game that you end up playing against that deck, you need to high roll on your aggro. And that's a really tough spot to be for a deck that's not purely optimized on that, right? Like you're running Kshatriya, that's like a level 5. You're running a 2 level 4. Between Amuro and Merida, you're playing like 8 level 4 pilots. The deck could go a little bit bigger depending on if you're playing the Unicorn Banshee mode. So now you're in a position where you want to not have to see one half of your deck, and that's a really hard spot to be in when we're talking about an 8-7 or 7-8-9 round tournament, where inevitably you're going to be playing against the best deck in the room. And that's why we probably just haven't been seeing the deck perform all that well going into like the top cuts of the different tournaments that we've seen recently.
Impact things the way you want to. I still think it's a fantastic card, and I think someone can make it work. This video is not saying what will and won't work this set. It's saying
always room for someone to break it.
Immediate impact is as impactful on the competitive play of the format as I wanted it to be.
Also, again, kudos to both of these creators. You guys definitely want to check them out. I think they do some solid stuff. So hit that subscribe button on these guys and just double check that we hit Garrett with that subscribe also. Follow them. They make great videos.
I think we can look back at set 1 and say we had a pretty good meta. Yes, it was wing dominant. Yes, it was.
You had like 4 different decks you could choose. I think that's probably arguably a good place to be in. I wish mid-range had a better place to exist, but right now we're on the tail end of like bigger control decks fighting against aggro decks. RB Ping lived as like the closest thing you could call to like a true mid-range deck. So like, yeah, overall I think set 1 was a decent place to be at.
green blue dominant, but like red blue was super competitive, even the deck of choice at one point in the meta. Blue white was the original best deck in the format at the very beginning of the format and beta format, and it's like we had 4 real nice pillars. People could kind of play between these 4 decks and do well.
So overall, I think Garrett is kind of like probably closer to correct than not, in that very clearly the meta is just not in a fantastic place, right? You have like the contention between the two ends of the game where it's like heavy defense versus heavy aggro. And unfortunately, because of the way that these two decks play out, there's not a lot of room for anything else to be able to succeed. And then the power levels of set 2 were in a place where unfortunately nothing really broke through to change that dichotomy. While yes, blue purple is around, it's kind of doing the same things that the green blue deck was doing anyways, and then everything else kind of lives little sideline. It very much feels like we're just in an extension of set 1 without really kind of impacting set 2. And part of that might just trying to be considerate of what is in set 1, right? I mean, like you're talking about, set 1 had Amuro, it had Akira, it had Ale, it had Gramps. I mean, the starter decks were kind of nuts. But regardless, it had Wing Zero, right? So a bunch of cards that are really hard to follow up on. And as they're designing the sets, there's probably a good room or place or two where Bandai were just like, oh, wait, we probably need to tone this back because you don't want to get into a position where you're power creeping so fast and so hard that you end up becoming like the next Yu-Gi-Oh! So I do agree that a slower pace is probably better for the longevity of the game, but they need to get more creative in their design to be able to make things more impactful, right? Like, sure, the aggro purple stuff is doing fine, but like, what's Vulture doing, right? Now, what is Gallenhorn doing in this format, right? Or just Titans arguably are doing okay. You could build a pure or mostly pure Titans deck and kind of do okay, but I think my biggest point of contention is just the lack of variety of gameplay. It's kind of all the same. There's not a lot of differences with what we were doing before. However, now it's just more cemented towards two extremes versus having a little bit of variation in the middle. You can have some success with the blue-white decks, which is what we were doing before, and then you can either play wing or an aggro deck, and that's kind of where the meta's at the moment. I don't love it. I think set 2 did definitely have low impact, but I have high hopes that set 3 will hopefully be able to shake things up so that we can get more variety in the game. At its core, I think that has a bigger issue to do with the lack of impactful interaction in the Gundam card game right now. You're really just, for the most part, playing good stats and playing the most interactive color in the game, which is white. It's why white is great, because half your deck is built-in interaction, and I don't know that a game like Gundam benefits from just one color having blocker, or one color having kind of the catch-all and the best things you can be doing in a board-based card game. I think this will change over time with card design, but at the moment, I think that's where kind of the biggest issue hurts from, and where I've argued for best of 3 with sideboards, but I already made that video. Y'all can go check it out. So again, kudos to Side9 and Garrett. You guys are definitely going to check them out, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.